Hi, I'm bigcal and welcome back to Dragon Questober IV. Today it is time to take a look at the next mainline game in the series, Dragon Quest, or Dragon Warrior 4. We are no longer part of the Erdrick trilogy, we have moved on now to a new one, the Zenithian trilogy. Dragon Quest IV Chapters of the Chosen first released in Japan in 1990 for the Famicom, and then 2 years later, North America only, of course, as Dragon Warrior on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Unlike all the versions that I've looked at so far, there is no Super Famicom or Game Boy release of this game, meaning I only have to look at 2 versions of it. Yes! The main reason for that is by the time they would have gotten around to doing Dragon Quest IV for the Super Famicom, it was basically the end of the Super Nintendo's lifespan, so it was kind of pointless. And with no version for the Super Famicom / SNES, there was no version to port for the Game Boy or Game Boy Color either. Now, it did get a PlayStation 1 release instead, where they remade it using the Dragon Quest VII engine, so it's in 3D now. Of course, only released in Japan, and thus far the English localization that is being done by fans is not yet complete. So yeah, I only have to look at Dragon Warrior 4, the American NES version, and Dragon Quest Chapters of the Chosen on the DS, which is basically a port of the PlayStation 1 version anyway, so I am kind of playing it. The main review, as usual, will take a look at the NES version first and foremost, and then there'll be a segment where I take a look at the DS version and comparing the differences and things and what's changed and stuff like that, as per usual. So, with all that said, let's get started. As the title of the game suggests, things are split into chapters. Each chapter focuses on a different party member before they meet the hero. So now we get to learn what life was like before they joined up with the hero, and more importantly, why they joined up with the hero. Adds a hell of a lot of character this time to your party members, as before we just had, the legendary hero, or we had descendants of the legendary hero with no real story or anything or background, or we had completely custom created characters like in Dragon Quest III. So this time we get to know everyone a lot more and find out exactly why they've decided to fight against evil. Much better in my opinion, and yeah, once all of those party members have had their own chapter, everything comes together at the end, joined up together to fight the real evil. Chapter 1 sees you take control of Ragnar, a soldier from Burland. Children in the nearby village have been going missing, and it's up to you to find out where they went. This first chapter reminds me a great deal of how Dragon Quest III starts, almost with a tutorial for the game. You only have access to a small area so you don't get lost or confused about where to go, and as usual speaking to NPCs is a must to figuring out what to do. It also emphasises the importance of the day and night cycle, letting you know early on that you can only speak to certain people at night, and this is important throughout the game. Along the way, you can also completely miss a pretty useful party member, Healy the Heel Slime. He's in a cave down an optional path, and the first time I played it, I missed him too. But thankfully, as you climb the tower for the final part of this chapter, another soldier will randomly talk about how he wishes he had agreed to team with the slime. I had to backtrack a little, but trust me, he is 100% worth getting due to the fact he heals you in battle. The end of Ragnar's chapter sees you finding the children who have been abducted by monsters. Kill the monsters, but before they die you discover that the reason they are kidnapping children is that there is a legendary hero out there who has been born, and they wish to kill him before he can come of age and, well, fuck their shit up. With all of this new information, Ragnar decides to explore the world in search of this hero so that he might keep him safe. We then move to Chapter 2, centred around Elena, the Princess of Santine, who is desperate to leave the castle and journey around the world getting stronger and proving her strength. Her father is less than pleased with this and attempts to keep her from leaving, but of course that doesn't last long. Joining you are Bray and Christo, two loyal subjects determined to keep her safe. Elena is a physical fighter who doesn't learn any magic, while Bray is a more offensive mage with Christo learning a lot of healing spells. The dynamic between the three reminds me of the party in Dragon Quest II. As you travel around, you get to fight a monster who has been demanding a female offering in return for not killing an entire village, solve a kidnapping of yourself, cure your father who has lost his voice from having a terrible nightmare, and finally competing in a tournament to save a princess from having to marry some weirdo named Necro Slayer. But just as it seems like Elena's life is going well, she's summoned back to her castle, only to find it empty. Was the nightmare her father had more than just a nightmare? We'll have to wait and find out in the final chapter. Next is a bit of a strange chapter, as it introduces a gameplay style we've really not seen before in Dragon Quest. Torneko Taloon is a mere merchant, with dreams of opening up a store of his own. However, like all things in life, he needs money to do it. For a while, you work in a shop, selling items to anyone who comes in, earning a tiny percentage of what you sell at the end of the day. This is definitely monotonous, especially the first time you play the game and don't really understand what you should be doing. You see, just going to work every day and selling basic items will get you nowhere. Instead, you must venture out into the world, kill monsters and find new items to sell. Torneko thankfully has a crazy drop rate for enemies after a battle, so most fights will result in you finding some new piece of armour or weapon, which you can either equip to help with battles, or sell to the owner of the store you work in, which you can then sell on while you work there, earning a percentage of the sale. Eventually you'll have decent enough equipment and a high enough level to venture further across the map, taking you to new locations that offer up new quests and money-making opportunities, such as preventing a war between two nations and finding expensive items to sell for a huge profit. It won't be too long until you are able to buy a shop, but this still doesn't satisfy Torneko, who continues to earn more and more money to help complete the construction of a tunnel that will open up a brand new trade route between countries. Once you've accomplished all of that, the king will inform you of the Zenithian sword, so rare and powerful it will basically be priceless. And so Torneko decides to venture out into the world to find this legendary item to make him the greatest merchant of all. Which is literally his reason for joining up with the hero later in the game. Yeah, this one's a little out there. Moving on to Chapter 4, this one revolves around two sisters, Nara and Mara. Their father was murdered by his apprentice Balzac, and the girls are travelling around the world to avenge him. Both are physically weak, instead relying on magic. Nara has powerful healing spells, while Mara can use attacking spells, making them a perfect team. Their journey eventually leads them back home, where they are told of another apprentice their father had, who was wounded pretty bad, but still may be alive somewhere. Orin, the other apprentice, is said to be hiding out not too far from the village, so you venture out to find him and see if he has any answers for you regarding the whereabouts of Balzac. Orin is deep within a cave, and when found agrees to join you to get revenge. Despite being an uncontrollable party member, It is good having him here as he's a strong physical attacker, something you have lacked so far in this chapter. With the party for this chapter complete, you can travel to Kilian Castle, where you believe Balzac is hiding out in. Things aren't what they seem here, as nobody is allowed to visit the king, and in fact nobody knows where in the castle the king even is. Nobody except for the councillor. One more short quest needs to be complete in order to get him to take you to the king, and when you finally do, you discover that Balzac has taken over the castle. A battle ensues, and once victorious, peace reigns throughout the land. Or does it? Not a chance. Instead, you get thrown into another fight against Kilian, the real ruler who was controlling Balzac, and he kicks your asses. When you finally wake up, you find yourself in jail. Luckily for you, you're able to escape with a boarding pass for a ship, but you have to leave Orin behind. Balzac still lives, Kilian has been revealed as an even bigger threat, and they both appear to be working for that weirdo Necrosaro too. Nara and Mara still have a heck of a journey ahead of them, which will continue in the final chapter. One very important reveal is made during this chapter, and that is the secret of evolution. Nara and Mara's father was researching this and appeared to have uncovered the truth behind it, and that's when Balzac killed him, taking those secrets with him. The secret of evolution allows any being to transform into a hideous monster with great power, and no doubt this will come into play in the future. And now, Chapter 5. We are finally introduced to the hero, who is living in some out-of-the-way village where everyone's goal is to train you to become, well, the hero. Unfortunately for you, before your training can be completed, monsters arrive to murder you. The villagers scramble to hide you, and your childhood friend even makes the ultimate sacrifice, using the transform spell to look just like you, fooling the monsters into thinking they have killed the future hero. With your village in ruins and everyone you know and love dead, it's time for an adventure! Yay! Yeah, so at this part of Chapter 4, you now get to visit new locations and old locations from previous chapters as you eventually meet up with all the party members on your way to finally destroy Necrosaro. It can take a while to meet up with everyone, but you quickly run into the sisters Nara and Mara in Endor, who just seem to be chilling. Then you find Torneko, who is in the middle of acquiring a ship, but the lighthouse needs relit first. When you meet up with Elena and her team, you discover that Christo is severely injured, and only a rare plant can cure him. Once you find it and cure him, they join up with you as well. Next you end up back at Kilian Castle, where you run into Ragnar. This results in a big battle for revenge against Kilian, who demolished Mara and Nara last time, and with that done, the hero's party is fully assembled. With a full party on hand, now it's time to further explore the world, collecting key items, actual keys to open up all those pesky locked doors, defeat Balzac again, hunt down the legendary pieces of Zenithian weapons and armour, obtain a hot air balloon for air travel, climb the world tree, defeat a demon lord, visit a dragon god, and of course finally defeat Necrosaro. This final part of the game was without a doubt my favourite part, just because of how open world the exploration is. You see, normally in games you get locked out of certain areas that you're not supposed to visit later on, and while that does happen here with certain parts locked behind doors where you don't get the key till later on, for the most part you really can go anywhere and do anything. Sure, you might be a bit underleveled in certain areas, but with enough healing spells and items, you can make it through a lot of those fights and earn decent experience, level up and be perfectly fine. You can also find pieces of the Zenithian set way earlier than you're supposed to, which can make some of the boss battles much easier, and that is just a great reward for exploring. You also discover more story elements as you visit old and new locations, leading you, the hero, to discover that you are in fact half Zenithian, with the power to prevent any evildoer from taking over the world. That explains why Necrosaro tried to have you killed in your village. But why exactly is Necrosaro out to destroy humans? Well, we get a glimpse as to why when you uncover a secret room inside a tower in Rosaville. Here, an elf named Rose is being guarded due to the fact that her tears turn into rubies, and humans have tried to use this for financial gain. Necrosaro, once known as just Saro, befriended Rose and tried to save her from the humans. However, believing all humans to be vile creatures, he has taken it upon himself to rid the world of them. Rose is thankful to Saro for saving her, but knows that his attempt to wipe out mankind is wrong and that he needs to be stopped. It's not long before you discover that Esturk, Lord of the Underworld, has been uncovered by miners. You and the party must rush to defeat him before Necrosaro can recruit him. During this, we get another small cutscene about Rose, who has apparently been discovered and kidnapped and eventually killed by humans. This drives Necrosaro over the edge, but we have to deal with him later. Being part Zenithian also grants you access to Zenithia itself, essentially this world's version of heaven, where the Dragon God grants you a small power boost. So small that I didn't even gain a single level at this point in the game, to you and your Zenithian sword. From here, it's all up to you to defeat Necrosaro from achieving the secret of evolution and overthrowing the world. In order to defeat Necrosaro, you must go to the depth of hell itself, known as Nadiria, I believe it is, although I'm not sure if they call it that in this game yet or if that's added in later. But yeah, it's basically this game's version of hell with Zenithia as heaven. Once you go down there, you cannot enter Necrosaro's castle as it is surrounded by a barrier, and the barrier is of course protected by a number of monsters. These result in 4 big boss battles, which you can take on in any order you want, and in between you are free to go and heal up at this nice little healing spot that just so happens to be in hell. Yeah, sure, why not? Defeating those is fairly easy if you're at a decent level. One of them might give you trouble, but once all that's done, the barrier is down and it's time to enter the castle and kick Necrosaro's ass. This battle is split up into multiple sections, as using the secret of evolution, he transforms into a big monster. You start hacking away at him, different limbs disappear, and then he transforms again, and it's a really cool fight. Although honestly, I found it to be the easiest boss fight in the game, but that was just me. Necrosaro dead, the secret of evolution has been lost forever, and the world is now saved. Dragon Quest IV has one of the biggest changes to gameplay of any game in the series, in my opinion. One that will go on to thankfully be optional in future games rather than forced upon you here. See, during battle, as you would expect, you have numerous party members, you select all of their attacks, and they all do an attack, and that's how the battles go. Except here. Here, you can't control your party members in the final chapter. Now, in previous chapters, you would get additional party members showing up, like Orin and Healy the Heel Slime, and those were just, chapter-based party members. They don't return. You don't get to use them again, so it made sense for them to not be controllable. However, when you have 3 party members in the Elena chapter, you can control all 3. When you have the 2 sisters in that chapter, you can control both of the sisters. Chapter 5 comes along and you can only control the hero. Yep, your entire party will act on their own. This has some advantages for sure, as it speeds up battles by you not having to tell 4 characters how to attack, just your hero. Plus, when battling more than one monster, if you happen to kill something, the AI controlled party members will automatically switch to something else to hit, rather than trying to attack an already dead monster. They can also seemingly make changes on the fly, healing you up if you take a big hit during a turn, despite being at full health beforehand. Obviously, being at full health, there will be no need for the party member to select a healing spell, so it must have decided to do so after you've been hit. However, there are downsides to it as well. What was a positive can also turn into a negative. If the AI controlled party member kills a monster you were aiming for, then you sadly still try to attack nothing, making you waste a turn. Without the ability to fully control everyone, they can also make some really dumb attack decisions too, such as trying to use a certain magic spell on monsters that are immune to it, then continuing to try and cast the same spell over and over again, despite the fact it won't work. Or one of the weaker physical attackers might try to keep doing a basic attack for 1 or 2 damage instead of casting a powerful spell that could kill the monster outright. And the part about healing too? Sometimes they just won't cast healing when you actually want them to. The most control you have over them is via the tactics menu, where you can actually tell them to be all-out attackers, defenders, magic users, or set them to not use magic at all if you need to save MP. The problem is that it applies to your entire team, not each individual character. But do you want to know the worst part? There is a way to control the party members in Chapter 5. Using a Game Genie. Yeah, I actually bought a Game Genie specifically for this video to test it out to see if it worked, and yes, it does indeed work. When you get to Chapter 5, make sure you saved your game, take out the cartridge, stick it in the Game Genie, stick the Game Genie in, put in the code. When you load up your save, as long as you're in Chapter 5, you can now control your party members. It was locked behind a cheat code that you need to buy a Game Genie for. However, I did play through the entire game without it, as I wanted to experience it for how it actually was released, and not with a cheat code. However, if you are planning to play Dragon Quest IV on the NES and you have access to a Game Genie, I highly recommend you use it. The annoying tactics aside, battles for the most part are still the exact same as they have been in previous games, only some new attacks have been added, which for the hero, great. For the AI controlled party members, not so much. You see, there are some attacks and spells that you might never see during your playthrough if the AI simply chooses to not use them, making them complete and utterly worthless, and again making sure that you have one of these so you can control everyone and actually try out all of these attacks. Yeah, there are of course tons of new monsters added as well throughout the entire game, different ones, awesome, but the main ones that have been added in are my personal favourite, the King Slime and the Metal King Slime. Sadly, I only came across one Metal King Slime in my NES playthrough, and the bugger ran away before I had any chance to defeat it. Oh, just think of the experience points I could have gotten. With such a large party for this game, they introduced the wagon, allowing all 8 of your characters to wander around the world map with you, rather than being stuck in an inn like in Dragon Quest III. The big benefit of this is that you are able to switch around party members as you please, letting you find the best combination that works for you. Also, everyone will gain experience points, so even if you don't use certain members, they will grow stronger and learn new spells. However, once you venture into deep caves and tall towers, you lose access to the wagon, as obviously it can't fit, so you are just left with the 4 main party members. Perhaps the best part of the wagon though is being able to use healing spells from those members not in your party, using up their MP instead. Despite talking about these in previous Dragon Questober videos, this is actually the first time they were introduced to a Dragon Quest game. Yep, mini medals. Called small medals at this point, there are only 32 to be found in the game, and as always, they can be exchanged for special items once you find the Medal King. The best part is that you only need 20 of them to access one of the best pieces of equipment in the game, the Metal Babble Helm. The entire Metal Babble set is actually better than the Zenithian set, so it's well worth seeking out. Unfortunately, finding some of the medals is not easy. In future games, the ground would sparkle to let you know that there is a hidden item there. Here, nothing. You just have to know there is an item on the floor and search for it. The only saving grace is that you can find 20 of the 32 without searching the ground once, so make sure to check every vase, dresser and chest. Travelling around has always been a big part of the Dragon Quest games, especially games 2 and 3 when you get access to a ship and then some form of air travel. The same can be said for Dragon Quest IV, only I find it to be better. While the world map is huge and very likely just as big as previous games, it feels smaller to me, but in a good way. I almost never found myself getting lost going from one location to another, always seemingly knowing exactly where I was and which direction I needed to go. Not only that, but the open world aspect feels so much more open due to the fact that there isn't that big of an increase in enemy levels for a while, allowing you to truly visit locations in any order that you desire. Stronger enemies will often get locked behind areas you need the final key to open, or the airship, and by the time you get to them you won't be outclassed by the monsters, but at the same time you'll still be able to earn a decent amount of experience points to keep on growing. Now, not everything has improved from previous games. Some of it is simply the exact same as it was before, or just isn't there at all. Item management is mostly the same, but instead of a typical bank like in Dragon Quest III, the shop that Torneko Taloon opens up is instead turned into the bank for your party in Chapter 5. However, with 8 characters in your party now, you do have access to 4 more inventories to fill up. But of course, you still need to be careful to make sure you have all the items you know you will need in your main party, just in case you lose access to the wagon. Perhaps the biggest disappointment for this game though, in my opinion, is the lack of being able to change classes. Now, I understand this to an extent. Each character in the party has their own specific role to play, and since they are actual characters with a personality, etc., having the option to pick their class would be strange compared to with Dragon Quest III, where you created each party member yourself. That said, I do wish there was a way to make a character a full-on sage, with the best of the best healing and recovery spells. Or maybe even add a couple of new class evolutions, like we would see in future games. So while you could still have Elena as a fighter, you could get a higher form of that class with stronger attacks. But, as I said, that's going to have to wait for future games. In what will become a trend with Dragon Questober videos, mainline Dragon Quest games from 4 onwards only had 2 or maybe 3 ports / remakes / remasters, making it considerably easier for me to play through all of the versions, as usually only 2 of them will get an English release. This is a godsend for me, as going forward, once games start on the Super Nintendo, they get bigger and longer. But I'll only have to look at probably 2 of the games per year, which will take considerably less time than having to do a NES version, a SNES version, a Game Boy version, then a Switch version. I'll only be stuck with 2 versions, which will probably still take longer overall than looking at 4 versions of some of the older games, but But again, 2 still easier than 4. And with that said, it's now time to look at the other version of this game for the Nintendo DS. Compared to all the releases of the first 3 Dragon Quest games, Dragon Quest IV has by far the biggest makeover when moved to the PlayStation and DS. Using the Dragon Quest VII game engine, Dragon Quest IV is now in 3D. Sure, it's a little rough around the edges, being from the early days of 3D, but I like it. Plus, the monsters in the game still look fantastic, complete with little animations during battle, rather than a static image. As far as changes and additions go, aside from the fact that it's on a new engine and it's 3D now, most of them are little things that I'll go through, and then one huge addition at the end. For example, the game opens up with the opening to Chapter 5 from the NES game, showing the hero in his village just as it's been attacked, before moving ahead with the game as normal. Then we have some name changes, with the likes of Christo and Bray now becoming Kirill and Borya, as well as Mara and Nara changing to Mina and Maya. Necro Saro is shortened to just Saro as well, but with a P at the beginning. And with the game being built in the Dragon Quest VII engine now, there are new monsters and weapons and attacks that were made for those games, and while it's cool to have them here, they're not really game breaking or change in any way, so yeah, just little things. Mini medals are now way more abundant and easier to find on the ground thanks to the previously mentioned Floor Sparkle, with 60 needed to obtain the best reward from the Metal King. This means that getting the liquid metal equipment, formerly Metal Babble, is more difficult, but always worth it. Next is not a small addition, but also not something I would really call a big addition either. We've still got to get to that. And that is the introduction of the Pioneer Town. Similar to the Merchant Town in Dragon Quest III, this town starts out as nothing and slowly grows over time as you help out by bringing new residents over that can help build and run shops, churches and even a castle. While completely optional, it's recommended to do if you want a bunch more mini medals, and you get access to a new shop with some nice items and equipment once it's fully built. Finally then, the big new addition to the game, Chapter 6. Going back into the game after defeating Saro, you'll be placed back into the world before you've killed him. Instead of battling him again though, you'll discover that a hole in the world has opened up, and inside is a huge sprawling dungeon that seems to connect random areas to each other, before ending with a boss encounter with 2 very strange beings known as Feng Yung and Chow Mein. Beat them and they'll give you a reward. A special flower has bloomed on the world tree that might interest you. A special flower? That doesn't sound too interesting, but you have to remember that it's on the world tree. Yggdrasil. So you get this special flower and take it to Rosa's grave, where she will be resurrected. So she will join your party as you venture out to fight Saro one last time. However, with Rose in the party, she intervenes and helps bring him back to his human form, preventing you from fighting altogether. Not only that, but Saro will join your party. He isn't just coming along with you for shits and giggles though, as he discovers that there is someone else out there masterminding everything and even manipulating him into doing everything he's done. Aemon. So remember those 4 battles to destroy the barrier around Saro's castle? Aemon was one of them. Not only has he been encouraging Saro to take over the world and use the secret of evolution to do so, but he was the one who orchestrated the kidnapping and murder of Rose. One final battle against him in his evolved form, and the game is truly over. There is still one more thing I would like to talk about though, and it was an exclusive feature for the PlayStation 1 version. Party Chat. You see, in the original Japanese PlayStation release of Dragon Quest IV, there is an option to chat with party members at any point during the game outside of battles. They will offer insight into the next objective, or simply comment on their surroundings and what has been happening. It's nothing amazing, I'll grant you, but it does give each party member more of a character than they ever had in the NES original. Sadly, due to the lack of a budget, the Party Talk script was not localised into English for the DS port and was left out entirely. Now, I've got to be honest here, I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's cool to have, yes, but I don't think it ruins the game by not having it there. That said, I played throughout this game. Despite the fact I only hear original, I used a modified ROM that brings back party chat into the game, completely localised by amazing fans. And yeah, it was fun to have access to that and get more character out of your party members, but like I said, it doesn't matter if it's there or not, but it is cool to have, and the fact that we now have access to it again is really great, and thankfully it is something they would keep in the future DS remakes that we'll move on to in the next couple of years of Dragon Questober. Believe it or not, for years and years I considered Dragon Quest IV to be the worst Dragon Quest game I had played. Now, granted, this was before Dragon Questober had started and before I played some of the original NES versions, otherwise Dragon Quest II would definitely have sunk to the bottom of that list. However, there was a reason that I wasn't that big into Dragon Quest IV previously. So when I did get into Dragon Quest for the first time, I think it was 2015, in one of my very first pickups videos I show off the games, and I got Dragon Quest VI and Dragon Quest IX on the DS. And again, you have to understand the circumstances. So Dragon Quest IX was a brand new game for the DS. It was the newest one on that system at that time. So it was made for the DS in mind, big, massive story, fantastic. Dragon Quest VI, well, the remake obviously, was from the Super Famicom game. And as I mentioned earlier, once the games got to the Super Famicom, they became bigger and longer compared to the NES games. And yeah, they were by and large better in a lot of ways. So when I played those, absolutely loved them. The next game I played was Dragon Quest IV on the DS. Now, not knowing anything about Dragon Quest, I just assumed this would be similar to Dragon Quest VI. After all, they were both part of the Zenithian trilogy along with Dragon Quest V, so it must be very similar. I played the game, and then it ended. And I was confused, it just didn't seem to go on as long, and it wasn't this big epic story compared to Dragon Quest VI. And I just felt let down with it. It's like, this isn't very good. Of course, looking back now, I understand how silly I was. If I'd just done a small Google search, I would have had more understanding of why the game is like it is. Unlike Dragon Quest V and VI on the DS, this was not a Super Nintendo game. It was a NES game. And yeah, for the NES, Dragon Quest IV is huge and fantastic. But when you're comparing it to what a Super Nintendo game was capable of doing, how much more story and gameplay it could have had, yeah, it didn't quite live up to my expectations. As silly as that was, that's just how I felt at the time. So, has my opinion of Dragon Quest IV changed? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Now, not only did I really enjoy my time with Dragon Quest IV Chapters of the Chosen on the DS, I was very surprised by just how much I enjoyed my time with the original NES version. Now, when it comes to the end of these videos, I often recommend which version you should play. And I said back then, obviously, with the first 3 games, if you have access to the Super Famicom versions in English, play those, otherwise go with the Switch version. They're very easy to access, you can buy them off the eStore, there is a physical version you can get that's still widely available, and yeah, while they don't look as good, they still play perfectly fine, you'll have a good time. it's very rare that I would recommend the NES version. Now, true, I only have the two versions to recommend as there isn't an English version of the PS1 game just yet. But I can genuinely say that the NES version is every bit as good and as fun as the DS version. With a Game Genie. You see, because this game lets you control your party in Chapter 5 and going forward with Chapter 6. This one you need the bloody Game Genie for, but apart from that, this is a fantastic version of the game still, and I genuinely enjoyed every second of my time with it, except for maybe a little bit of the Torneko Taloon stuff, just because it can be a little dull. But once you figure out what you're doing, especially when I went from this and moved to the DS version, I knew exactly what I was doing, and I had a blast with his chapter. Completely turned around with my opinion on it. So yeah, I love Dragon Quest IV. Not quite my favourite, that still goes to Dragon Quest III, but yeah, this is no longer, in my opinion, the worst Dragon Quest game that I have ever played. Well, that is all for Dragon Quest IV review. Hope you enjoyed it, hope that I had a decent insight into the game, what was good, what was bad, the version differences between the NES and the DS, which is a port of the PlayStation 1, and hopefully I did a good job telling you that I really enjoyed playing this game. So, I'm bigcal, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again not too long from now with the final video of Dragon Questober IV, where I take a look at Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince, where we get to see the events of Dragon Quest IV from Saro's point of view.